They were supposed to be harmless, slow, floating relics of an older world. That's what the German officers believed, until the day those silent giants appeared over the Atlantic. In the dark waters below, U-boats ruled with terror, striking supply ships and vanishing before anyone could react. But then something strange happened. Crews began reporting a shape in the clouds, a shadow that moved without sound, and followed them for hours. At first, they laughed. Blimps? Against submarines? Impossible. Then the first submarine disappeared. And the second. And the third. German officers panicked as they realized the truth. These massive American airships could stay in the sky longer than any aircraft, track U-boats from miles away, and guide destroyers straight to them. There was no hiding. No escape. In a war ruled by steel and fire, it was the quietest weapon that terrified them the most. By 1942, the Atlantic Ocean had become a graveyard. German U-boats prowled beneath the waves with deadly confidence, sinking thousands of tons of Allied supplies each month. Convoys burned across the horizon. Merchant sailors vanished without a trace. And the German Navy believed they held an unbreakable grip on the sea. Every strategy the Allies tried seemed too slow, too late, or too limited. Patrol planes couldn't stay airborne long enough. Warships couldn't cover the vast ocean. And sonar struggled to detect submarines hiding deep in the black water. The Atlantic was simply too big, and the enemy too quiet. But in desperate moments, innovation often takes the strangest forms. Enter an idea so unusual, so unexpected, that even American commanders questioned it at first: use massive, helium-filled blimps, floating airships, to hunt the most advanced submarines in the world. It sounded absurd. Yet these slow-moving giants carried something no aircraft or warship could match: endurance, altitude vision, and radar that could expose a submarine's position long before it could dive. The stage was set for one of the most astonishing shifts in naval warfare. A moment when the sky itself became the ultimate hunter of the deep. Before American blimps ever drifted across the Atlantic sky, the ocean itself had become a battlefield unlike any other in World War II. It was a place where death came not with warning shots or marching armies, but with a silent torpedo fired from deep beneath the waves. And no force mastered this deadly art better than the German U-boat fleet. Germany understood that Britain's survival depended entirely on supplies: oil, ammunition, food, steel, all carried across the ocean by convoys. If those lifelines were cut, the British Isles would starve, factories would collapse, and the war in Europe would tilt decisively in Hitler's favor. So the Kriegsmarine unleashed its wolf packs, coordinated groups of submarines that hunted Allied ships with ruthless efficiency. By early 1942, the ocean was bleeding. More than 1,000 Allied ships had already been destroyed. Entire convoys were wiped out in a single night. Survivors described the terror of watching torpedo wakes streak toward them through moonlit water, followed by the thunderous explosion that sent ships twisting into fire. The Allies tried everything. Destroyers raced across the waves, dropping depth charges that shook the sea. Aircraft performed long patrols, but could only stay in the air for a few hours at a time before returning to base. Even when planes spotted a submarine, the U-boat simply dove and vanished into the darkness. Technology, endurance, fuel, weather, everything favored the submarines. And the Germans knew it. Inside U-boat command centers, officers celebrated every victory. Messages from the Atlantic painted the same story: enemy sinking. Convoy scattered. Minimal resistance. The U-boats appeared unstoppable. But hidden within this dominance was their greatest weakness. The moment they surfaced to recharge batteries, communicate, or breathe fresh air. That brief window, just a few minutes, was the only time they were vulnerable. The challenge? Someone had to be watching the ocean constantly. Not for hours. Not for a single patrol. But day and night, over thousands of miles, without rest. Planes couldn't do it. Ships couldn't do it. Radar technology was still young. The Allies needed something that could stay in the sky longer than a plane, see farther than a ship, and keep watch patiently over the endless Atlantic. A strange solution was coming. One no German commander could have predicted. When the U-boat crisis reached its darkest point, the U.S. Navy began searching for solutions beyond conventional thinking. Aircraft were fast, but they couldn't stay in the air for long. Destroyers were powerful, but they couldn't cover the massive ocean. Submarine hunters existed, but they required fuel, manpower, and constant coordination. The Atlantic demanded something different. Something persistent. Something patient. That's when an old idea resurfaced, quite literally, from America's past. Blimps. Massive, helium-filled airships that floated rather than flew. Before the war, they were associated with advertising, sports events, and peaceful sky tours. They were slow, vulnerable, and seemingly useless for modern combat. No one imagined they could threaten the most feared submarines in the world. But a few American naval engineers saw what others didn't. Blimps didn't need speed, they needed endurance. They didn't need armor, they needed eyes. And they didn't need guns, they needed radar. As U.S. radar technology rapidly advanced, someone realized blimps could carry heavy radar systems far longer than planes. They could scan massive stretches of ocean continuously, their altitude giving them a wide surveillance range. Even better, they could loiter above convoys for hours, sometimes days, without landing. It was a concept so simple that commanders dismissed it at first. Airships are obsolete. They're too slow. One shell could destroy them. But the Navy ignored the laughter. They saw something else. The Atlantic didn't care about speed, only visibility. And on that front, blimps were unmatched. So quietly, away from public attention, America began converting old airship hangars, recruiting specialized crews, and building the K-class blimps, large, toughened patrol airships designed specifically to track submarines. They were equipped with long-range radar, magnetic anomaly detectors, radios that could coordinate with destroyers, and spotlights capable of exposing submarines even at night. German officers had no idea this transformation was happening. To them, blimps were still harmless toys drifting over American cities. But the U.S. Navy was preparing them for something far more serious. By the time the first patrols took off, a new chapter in the war was about to begin, one where the soft, floating giants of the sky would rewrite the rules of submarine hunting. Something strange was coming to the Atlantic. And the Germans weren't ready. When the first American blimps lifted off for active patrol, even their own crews weren't sure what to expect. They floated silently above the waves, their massive bodies gliding through the cold Atlantic air like silent watchers. Below them, the ocean stretched endlessly, dark, restless, and full of predators no one could see. But within the gondola of each blimp, radar screens hummed with possibility. The Germans never noticed them at first. U-boat crews were trained to fear aircraft engines, the thunder of approaching bombers, and the distant whistle of depth charges. But blimps made no such sound. They drifted quietly, often hidden by clouds or distant mist, positioned high enough to remain unseen yet close enough to detect anything moving on the surface. The first encounter came during an early morning patrol. A blimp's radar operator detected a faint return, small, metallic, moving slowly. The blimp descended through a layer of clouds, and there it was, a German submarine running on the surface, recharging its batteries. The U-boat crew believed they were alone. No aircraft engines echoed in the sky. No ship masts broke the horizon. But the Americans were right above them. Instead of attacking immediately, the blimp did something far more devastating. It called for help. Within minutes, destroyers redirected toward the blimp's coordinates. The submarine dove the moment the crew spotted the airship's shadow, but it was too late. The blimp tracked its position precisely, guiding the destroyers like a shepherd dog herding its prey. Depth charges exploded through the water. Hours later, the submarine was gone. Word of this strange encounter reached German command, but they didn't believe it. A blimp? A slow, fragile balloon? Impossible. They assumed the submarine had been found by a plane. Commanders dismissed the reports. But then it happened again. And again. And again. A U-boat captain later wrote that seeing a blimp overhead was like being stared at by a ghost. Unlike planes, which made noise and moved quickly, blimps simply appeared, silent, drifting, relentless. They lingered for as long as needed. They didn't need to return to base. They didn't run out of fuel quickly. Even when U-boats dived deep, the airships circled above, refusing to leave, waiting patiently with radar locked on. The psychological effect was enormous. U-boat crews began reporting airborne hunters that followed them for hours. Officers complained that every time they surfaced at night, a shape seemed to emerge from the darkness above, suspended in the sky like a watching eye. One German officer wrote, "We feared the blimps more than the destroyers. A destroyer might lose your trail. A blimp never would." Even more shocking was how effective blimps were at night. Equipped with powerful searchlights, they could detect submarines attempting a stealthy recharge on the surface. Once spotted, the U-boats struggled to decide, dive and risk radar detection, or stay on the surface and risk being exposed. The Germans soon learned a critical truth. There was no right choice. Blimps forced submarines into constant movement, stopping them from recharging batteries long enough, disrupting communications, and exhausting crews. Their very presence, even a single silhouette on the horizon, could paralyze operations. By mid-1943, the Kriegsmarine finally understood the scale of the threat. Reports described blimps as persistent hunters, silent shadows, and the Americans' floating curse. The officers had once mocked the idea of blimps being used in warfare. Now, they feared them. A new predator had arrived in the Atlantic. And it didn't roar. It whispered. As the American blimps expanded their patrol network, the Battle of the Atlantic began to change in ways no one could have predicted. What started as an experimental idea soon became one of the most effective anti-submarine tools in the entire Allied arsenal. The strength of the blimps wasn't in their size or their speed. It was in their patience. A destroyer could only guard a convoy for a limited time. A bomber could only scan for submarines until its fuel ran low. But a blimp? A blimp could stay in the sky day and night, sometimes patrolling for more than 30 hours straight without landing. That endurance alone began to reshape U-boat operations. 1. Convoys became nearly untouchable under blimp protection. Whenever a convoy left the American coastline, a blimp drifted above it like a guardian angel. Submarines lurking nearby knew exactly what that meant. If they approached, they risked being spotted long before a torpedo could be fired. The blimp would mark their position, summon destroyers, and ensure no surprise attack was possible. U-boat commanders began avoiding any convoy protected by a blimp. The risk was simply too high. For the Allies, this was revolutionary. Hundreds of ships crossed the Atlantic under blimp coverage. And not a single one was lost to a submarine while under blimp escort. 2. Blimps exposed the ocean's hidden movements. Their high vantage point allowed blimp crews to see far beyond the horizon. Submarines couldn't spot them easily, but the blimps could detect the slightest disturbance, a periscope wake, an oil slick, even the faint reflection of a U-boat hull beneath the surface. Radar amplified this advantage, allowing blimps to track submarines through fog, rain, and darkness. Where aircraft flew too fast to study the waves, blimps floated slowly, scanning every detail with care. 3. The night became dangerous for German U-boats. Before blimps entered the war, night was the U-boat's kingdom. Covered in darkness, submarines surfaced to recharge batteries, transmit messages, and attack convoys. But the Americans changed that with a simple combination. Radar plus searchlights. Blimps could detect submarines in complete darkness, then drop flares or switch on powerful lights that turned night into day. A submarine caught in that beam had seconds to react, and even if it dove, the blimp already had its location locked and could call destroyers. German captains complained that the blimps stole the night from the U-boat. 4. Blimps forced U-boats into constant discomfort. Even when submarines weren't attacked, the psychological pressure was brutal. A single blimp tracking overhead forced a U-boat to remain submerged for long periods, sometimes far longer than was safe. Batteries drained. Air turned stale. Crews grew exhausted. They couldn't send messages. They couldn't repair machinery. They couldn't recharge batteries at the proper time. Every decision became a gamble. Many U-boat officers noted that the blimp threat reduced their operational range, often causing missions to be aborted simply because they couldn't safely surface. 5. Blimps coordinated entire fleets with precision. Airships acted like command towers in the sky. With radios linking them to destroyers, aircraft, and coastal stations, they became the essential eyes directing attacks. Instead of hunting blindly, Allied ships now moved with purpose. The Americans didn't just add a new weapon. They added a new system of warfare, one that forced German U-boats into chaos. The Atlantic, once ruled by stealthy predators, began shifting into Allied control, not because of massive battleships or advanced bombers, but because of slow, floating, persistent watchers in the sky. By late 1943, the balance had changed forever. By late 1943, the German U-boat force, once the terror of the Atlantic, began to crumble under the pressure of America's new aerial hunters. The ocean that had once served as a shield for the submarines was now turning into a trap, and blimps were one of the key reasons for that shift. Every month, more blimps joined the patrol lines. Their presence didn't always lead to direct kills, but their impact was far more devastating in the long run. They strangled the U-boat's ability to operate. A submarine forced to stay underwater for too long couldn't fight effectively. One that couldn't surface to recharge batteries became nothing more than a drifting coffin. Statistics from the period reveal the dramatic difference. Before blimp patrols became widespread, U-boats operated almost freely near American shores, sinking ships at alarming rates. But once the blimps took control of coastal and mid-Atlantic patrol zones, the losses dropped sharply. In some regions, sinkings fell by over 80%, a number German command struggled to understand. Reports began flooding into Kriegsmarine headquarters. Convoy unreachable. Enemy patrol overhead for 14 hours. Unable to surface, airship present. The Germans soon discovered a painful truth. Even when a blimp didn't destroy a submarine, it prevented it from attacking anything else. A U-boat that couldn't strike was as good as sunk. The shift broke German morale. Captains who once bragged about iron coffins now spoke of floating shadows that hunted them day after day. Many crews described feeling trapped, exhausted, and constantly watched. Some submarines returned to port without firing a single torpedo, not because of Allied destroyers or bombers, but because a blimp simply refused to leave their position. Blimps didn't win the Battle of the Atlantic alone, but they became the weapon that robbed U-boats of their greatest strength, freedom. Slowly, quietly, and with relentless patience, the Americans had turned the tide of the war, not with speed, not with firepower, but with endurance and innovation. The hunters had become the hunted. In the end, the German officers were right about one thing. The enemy that changed the Battle of the Atlantic wasn't the one they expected. They feared destroyers. They feared long-range bombers. They feared new Allied technologies. But they never imagined that the quiet, floating shapes drifting above the waves would become one of their greatest obstacles. The blimps were never meant to be glamorous. They didn't roar like fighters or strike like bombers. They didn't have heavy armor or blazing guns. What they carried instead was something far more powerful. Time. Vision. Patience. And in a war fought across thousands of miles of dark ocean, those three things were worth more than steel. For American crews who rode those slow giants, the mission was simple: watch the sea, protect the convoys, and never give the submarines a moment to breathe. Hour after hour, night after night, they floated above the Atlantic, forming a living shield between German torpedoes and the ships that kept the Allied war machine alive. To the men trapped inside U-boats, the blimps became symbols of dread, silent watchers that turned the vast ocean into a cage. No matter how deep they dove or how far they ran, the shadow above seemed to follow. It wasn't the violence of battle that broke them, it was the relentless pressure of knowing they were never truly alone. And that was the genius of the American strategy. The blimps didn't just hunt submarines. They changed the psychology of the war. Today, many of those airships are forgotten, overshadowed by the louder machines of history. But in the quiet skies of the Atlantic, they wrote their own chapter. A chapter where the simplest idea defeated the deadliest weapon. A reminder that sometimes the most underestimated tools make the biggest impact.